This interview was conducted in the aged care facility where 96-year-old Robert lives. He had his interview questions answered on a typed printed page, which was interesting as an interviewer, trying to keep the interview to a flowing pace, but also not wanting to throw Robert off at all. We managed to divert somewhat from the prescribed questions and compete with the noisy air conditioning unit and other staff interruptions. I do notice I jump around a bit trying to give credence and due recognition to the different things that Robert has done in his time, and trying to ascertain a good sense of the long lifespan lived before this year. But really these parts of his story would be better honoured over a number of interviews. As an elderly resident of an aged care facility, Robert accepted the restrictions as par for the course, used to being kept to a certain small-scale world. The lack of family visitors over this time didn't worry him too much, as he had 60 to 80 residents on his wing of the home to interact with, and a long walk inside and out his spacious part of the facility each day. He explains that he was quite grateful for the restrictions and readily accepted the changes because he believed they were for the best. Cooperation has been the basis for the whole running of this place, he says, and he felt well informed by written notices, announcements and caring staff. He feels that we need to be prepared for anything in the future and that there's never a day that doesn't hold the unknown within it. He believes his working class roots and Christian morals have equipped him to meet everyone equally and to adapt and accept all that life offers. It was such a pleasure to have some time with a man that has been born just after the world was recovering from the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1920, which killed an estimated 20 to 50 million people, or between 1 and 3% of the world's population at the time. Incidentally, at the time of this interview in December 2020, the number of COVID-related deaths worldwide was 1.7 million people, or 0.02% of the world's population. As a member of the elderly community of Victoria, whom we all underwent restrictions to protect as vulnerable members of society, Robert and the many residents of his aged care home remained well and fairly happy. As he says, no one fell to pieces. And as I say in response to this, that's not something that your generation tends to do. I hope you enjoy this interview with a great old-timer. Well, we're here today at an aged care facility in Victoria, in Wantirna, with Robert, who is 96 years young, I believe. So we're very, very grateful to have this interview with someone of that generation. I look forward to hearing what Robert has to say about the lockdown and the year that was 2020. Thank you for joining us, Robert.
Good to be here. I live at Wantirna Views, one of about 70 aged care homes owned by Opal Specialist Aged Care in several states. The atmosphere is pleasant. Apartments are of equal dimensions, about 45 by 20 metres, with a private bathroom over half the size and a picture window. My apartment faces north. There are approximately 250 residents. The staff are carefully selected, capable, neat and courteous. They work only here. Management is efficient and approachable. The setting is lawns and gardens.
Yes, it's a very beautiful place. I've just pulled in to do this interview, and it sort of reminds me a little bit of a holiday resort here. So it's a lovely aged care facility. So Robert, what's the culture like in this place? Is there a strong religious presence, would you say, or are there many people from other cultures? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what are some of the things that the residents actually do in here, and is there a strong sense of community?
The culture is mainly Anglo, but gradually extending. The foundation of Salford Park Independent and Aged Care as a single village was by a Rechabite organisation. Ownership has since been divided a number of times. Christian activities, including worship services, Bible study and fellowship evenings have continued, and there's been a succession of chaplains. There's mutual respect. A lifestyles coordinator arranges gentle exercises, outings, film shows, visiting entertainers, novelty events, community singing and so on. A weekly classical music appreciation session is conducted by a resident and is well attended. Residents mix freely. These comments, of course, relate to non-COVID times.
Yeah, I bet they do. Yeah, we're going to get to how things might have changed here after we've asked a few more questions. But it sounds like a really wonderful place to reside, and a great sense of community and people getting along really well. So do you think that your home houses people from a variety of backgrounds? And I guess we asked the question in these interviews about socioeconomic demographics. Would you say that this aged care facility caters for people from a certain socioeconomic status, or just anybody in a way?
Residents are from a range of socio-economic backgrounds, but there's no evidence of this in day-to-day practice.
Yeah, everybody's pretty much on level. So could you tell us a little bit about your working life prior to retirement? So what have you done throughout your time in the workforce? I'm sure it's a long history that you've got, but if you could sort of give us a little bit of an idea of what you used to do before you retired.
Originally a teacher, after service during World War II in highly secret signals intelligence, I studied philosophy and psychology and then theology, and spent 72 years as an active Baptist minister and religious counsellor. I have still conducted a weekly worship service for aged care residents during restrictions.
Ah, so you're actually still practising as a minister here? Wow, that's amazing. So, and how long have you been doing that for now? You said 72 years as an active Baptist minister. And is that ongoing? Amazing. Wow. And do you get many people attending services here?
Yes, we've said during the restriction time about 20.
Yeah.
But we had over 30 last Sunday.
Wow. So there's quite a high Christian presence here.
Oh, yes.
You would say, yeah.
And yes, and it's well accepted by people of any religion and none.
Do you think that people come to, because this is in Wantirna, which is in the east of Melbourne, isn't it? So do you think that people that come to live here are mostly from the area of Wantirna, or do you think that they've come from various places before here?
Fairly substantially people from this area, and quite often on the recommendation of friends who already have lived here.
Yeah, so, yeah, good recommendations because it's such a nice way to live. Yeah, and Wantirna is traditionally a suburb that was fairly white collar, wasn't it? Fairly white collar and sort of fairly white. There hasn't been a lot of multiculturalism in previous years in Wantirna, and I think it remains. Although there's a high prevalence of Asian families in Wantirna as a suburb now, but not so much in this home. It's fairly sort of, white Australian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. In any of those racial differences, if we like to put it that way, generally develop gradually.
Yeah.
And because there's acceptance of that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, we'll see what happens in 20 years here in Wantirna Views and see how it looks then. Yeah. So let's move on to the next question, which is about your family. So do you have a spouse still with you or not?
My wife of 72 years died on the 1st of December 2018, We had 4 children. The eldest died on the 23rd of March 2019.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Grandchildren, great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren are now in double figures.
Yeah.
In addition to family and some friends, senior colleagues capable of talking at depth are now gradually diminishing.
Yeah, I bet they are. Well, you're 96 years young, so I wouldn't expect there'd be too many people of your era left at this stage, but you're doing very well, in fine health. So with your children that you have remaining, and I'm very sorry that you have lost a child, and your wife passed away only a couple of years ago now, so she did really well as well. But yeah, in terms of how many people kind of regularly have contact with you, how many of your children do you see regularly here?
I see all 3 of our close family each week, and some of the grandchildren and others when they're able to make it according to the ease of restrictions.
That's right, yes, that's exactly right. Let's talk about a typical weekday before the restrictions, and then we'll get into how things changed for you, Robert, during this year immensely. So you were used to having people visiting you regularly and seeing and having that contact with family, but maybe you could just tell us what a typical weekday was like for you before the restrictions of 2020.
Well, a typical weekday was brief exercise, breakfast, devotions and prayer for all the extended family. I'd promised them on my 90th birthday that I would pray for each one of them by name every day so long as I lived. And then I find the mornings are the best time for concentration, and I set a couple of projects the previous day, and then in the afternoon I rest and read and have a little more activity.
Right, so you keep yourself your mind very active, and you set some goals and you make sure that you stick to those the next day. Fabulous. I'm just looking remembering what you were talking about that you did for work. You said you studied philosophy and psychology in your time before theology. Was that at university, was it? Or
Yes.
And that was just as an interest? Or did you end up, going into the psychology field at all before you became a Baptist minister?
Not extensively, although that, of course, was very useful when I was doing counselling as time went on.
Absolutely, it all comes in handy. And I also didn't touch on the fact that you served during World War II in highly secret signals intelligence as well. So you've had such an amazing variety in your life, haven't you, in terms of your mind and how you've kept active in the past? And
yes, it has been interesting.
Yeah.
One period we spent in Darwin after Cyclone Tracy.
Okay, right. And can you remind listeners who may be unaware of what date that was? What was the year of Cyclone Tracy again? Do you remember?
That was at the end of 1974.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Darwin was a small town then, even smaller than it is now. Yeah.
Yes. And we were in Darwin for 4.5 years during the major part of the reconstruction period.
Right, okay, interesting. Wow, so yeah, you basically kept busy. Before the restrictions happened and the COVID pandemic came into being, you would see family regularly, you would do some exercise, do your devotional prayer every day for all of the extended family, and also set goals and projects for yourself and just achieve little things each day, which is actually a testament to how well you are at 96 years old, I think. So how did that change when COVID-19 began to be managed in Australia? Could you tell us a little bit about the restrictions that were present in your life here in the home and what that meant for you?
We made sensible adaptation of the government restrictions, including limitation of resident interaction. We had all meals in our apartments. Absence from the village was generally only for medical appointments. the staff began wearing masks and shields. Visitors were restricted to communication at open windows at first. And these were less than ideal restrictions, but we all appeared to accept them because of the cooperative milieu of Wantirna Views.
But was that a little bit confronting when the staff began to wear, I know the masks are one thing, but the shields are a different thing altogether, aren't they? How were you with that aspect of that? I guess the changes that came in quite suddenly, where you weren't able to see people's faces that well, and then there was a shield there. How did that make you feel?
We accepted it quite readily because we knew the purpose of it. And then, of course, we used to try to pierce the disguise of each of the people when they came in.
So you made a game.
They were wearing badges, of course, which helped.
Yeah.
Unless they forgot to wear their badge.
Well, that'll keep everyone active for a little while, won't it? A game like that. That's a good idea. So everybody seemed to accept that pretty well. Like once the restrictions came in and things started to change, collectively it seems like the residents were happy to go along with those restrictions, would you say?
There's no doubt that cooperation has been the basis of the whole running of this place.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's wonderful. So did you ever sort of feel, I guess, a little bit confused or not informed about things that were happening? Did you feel like you weren't sure what was going on at any point, or did they let you know always what the things were that they were needing to do?
Mostly we were informed by written notice, and then there's a sound system, of course, as well.
So you get announcements. Did you have to wait in your rooms? Did you say that you were in your rooms, or were you allowed to wander around, the building and stuff like that, or were you quite kind of, I guess, separated from each other?
Well, at the height of the restrictions, we were advised to restrict ourselves to our particular wing.
Wing, yeah. How many residents would you say were in a wing? Not, just a rough estimate. Yeah.
Probably 60, 70 or 80.
Okay, so quite a few. And so you were actually allowed to sort of, communicate and mingle with those residents in that wing, which is not too isolating, is it?
And I took the opportunity of having about a 750-metre walk before and after each meal.
That's a pretty long way.
Just within the building.
Wonderful. So there's quite a lot of space in your wing, and there's quite a lot of space in your particular aged care facility, it seems, which is really great. Yeah.
There are places. Each wing has an area outside, which has a plastic roof over it and has opportunity for people to sit out in the sunshine.
Get outside in the fresh air, and you felt quite inclined to do that. And were you worried about the pandemic affecting you greatly, or was there a real worry and a sense of concern about you contracting COVID, or was it more about just making sure that everyone was protected en masse?
I realised that from my own point of view, of course, it would be particularly important that I didn't contract it, but it didn't become a matter of very great anxiety one way or the other.
You stayed fairly balanced about it. Okay, good. We're just going to move into the section that we do on mental health and how you went through this pandemic mentally, and how you felt. So maybe you could just describe to listeners how you felt over the course of the year. So at the beginning of the year, as we were introduced to the idea of coronavirus, and it seemed so far away. And then as COVID-19 kind of became more prevalent in Australia, and of course in Victoria, there was a lot on the media about the numbers going up, and how that felt for you from the start of that sort of journey to now, when we're kind of still dealing with a global pandemic, but the numbers have dropped and the restrictions have eased?
It's been very patchy in actual fact. Unfortunately, the further wave that resulted in the latest lockdown in Victoria, was due to circumstances that nobody in official positions can remember. There's been a lot of amnesia around, but it's been interesting trying to work out who it was that authorised the use of untrained people as supervisors.
Security. So we're talking, just for our listeners, we're talking about the hotel quarantine situation where a private security company was hired to monitor the residents of this hotel that were actually put in quarantine for 2 weeks after coming back into the country, and then those untrained security staff were fraternising with people that had one of them or some of them had actually contracted COVID-19, and that was really controversial because it was sort of linked to the rise in numbers in Victoria, because then, they were sort of coming and going from the hotel, the security staff, because they were casual staff, weren't they? And then they took it back out to the community. And I think that the Premier, Dan Andrews, was incredibly chastised and criticised for his management, or the government's management, of hiring private security companies that weren't trained. So that's what Robert's referring to at the moment. So there was a little bit of discrepancy around how that was mishandled, wasn't there?
That's right. We were really quite disappointed that we had to go into that social and economic malaise.
Yeah. So you felt some concern about the lack of responsibility, I guess, taken around that. And also some concern around the fallout from that for Victorians economically, as well as all of the restrictions that had to be put into place because it sort of got out. Yes.
We don't live an isolated existence here. We take very good cognizance of what's happening all around.
Yeah, so you were watching the news a lot and listening and reading the papers and listening. Yeah, so you were following it all quite closely, and there was some concern about that. Did you think that the way in which this new virus, was handled was reasonable and appropriate, apart from obviously that particular glitch? As a person that's lived in Australia for a long time and seen many governments come and go, and you would have, let me just do my maths here. Were you around with the Spanish flu, or was that just a bit before your time?
Well, no, I was here then.
Yeah. So you would have lived through a pandemic before. Let's talk a little bit about the comparison, I suppose, that you have seen with this pandemic comparatively to the Spanish flu.
It was, I think each of these things has to be taken as being discrete from the other, because the likelihood of infection differs in each case.
So the Spanish flu, did that affect people that you knew and loved? Do you remember? Do you remember how old you were when that was happening?
No, actually the worst of that was before my time.
Yeah.
An interesting thing was this, that my father sustained the infection, and he was waiting in the main street to catch a tram, and feeling very, very weak, he sat down on the curb, and he was accosted by a policeman who accused him of being drunk, which was impossible for him.
Yeah, okay, but he just had the flu.
Just had the flu.
Okay, so he got the flu, but he didn't perish from it.
No.
But a lot of people did. It swept through the world, didn't it?
That's
Similar
right.
to COVID. And so, just getting back to that question about, do you think that the virus was handled in a reasonable and appropriate way? What do you think about that?
There was a great deal about it, of course, that was novel to any other time, because there are no two pandemics that are the same.
That's right, yes.
And there's a variation in the type of infection. And this one has had a tremendous lot of work put into it, and the development of vaccines, which takes much longer than it's been able to take now, has been the result of very, very devoted and concentrated work.
Yes, it's still a work in progress, isn't it? They're trying to rush it onto the shelves, but these things take time, as you're saying. Yeah. So, did you at any stage experience sort of, had all high levels of feeling worried or anxious or depressed or lonely, or any of those sort of negative mental conditions during 2020? Was there a time in that journey from the start of the restrictions to now, as we're coming into summer in Victoria and it's kind of easing a bit, where you felt really low or really, really down about the whole global situation?
Fortunately, I never feel really low.
Don't you? Well, I always ask this question to everybody I interview. I say, from 1 to 10, can you rate your lowest state of mental health during 2020? 1 being really low, like not wanting to go on anymore, kind of low, and 10 being obviously just really, really happy and, content. So can you give us a little bit of a bandwidth, I suppose, of what your lowest state was during 2020 and what your highest state might have been?
I don't think it varied all that much.
Stayed pretty stable.
I've always taken a philosophical view of life, and there were so many other people involved that I can't mirror their moods and so forth either.
No.
Fortunately, we had no deaths in our family as a result of this, which probably helped.
I'd say so, yeah. You unfortunately had, the last 2 years before this year were a bit sad, I suppose, for your family, because you lost your wife in 2018 and then your son last year. So I guess, you were already sort of were in a grieving period, really, and then, you didn't lose anybody else. So,
well, actually, the grieving was very greatly alleviated by the fact that we had such pleasant memories of all the years that we were together.
Absolutely.
So, and being a Christian, I had no kind of worry about the deaths of people I loved.
What happens afterwards? That was going home, in a sense, isn't it? Well, that sounds good. So basically, you stayed fairly much in that. You're sort of fairly stable, you would say, during the year.
Oh yes.
Okay. Oh, good. What I would mind asking if you could describe to us the way in which information about COVID-19 was related to you by the staff at your residence. You were saying just before that you felt quite well informed, and that there was announcements over the loudspeaker, and you have a lot of staff. Just got a staff member coming in now, actually, with a little thing. Delivery. But yeah, you had a lot of staff informing you and keeping you up to date about things. So you didn't feel too confused or wondering what was going on at any stage?
No.
Yeah, great.
Information flow has been very good.
Great. Yeah, well, it sounds like it, and I get that feeling from just being in here. Even meeting someone at the reception was, incredibly warm, and communication's great, it seems. So you're very lucky, and it's a great place to be. So yeah, talking about people that you know outside of the home, or even some of the residents in here. Let's talk about your observations on how the restrictions have affected other people. You've remained fairly philosophical about it, fairly practical about it, and fairly stable and steady through it, and didn't have any sort of worries too much about it. Have you noticed anyone else in this place that you're living in the home, that has had, a hard time accepting or dealing with it, or is everybody similar to you in here?
I think it's been pretty uniform, the response to it. I can't think of anybody that has actually gone to pieces over it.
No. I don't think your generation go to pieces.
No.
I was just going to say, have you noticed or have you heard from your family members through this time, have your observations of them been that they've coped quite positively with it or practically, or have you noticed your family, different family members, children and grandchildren, perhaps struggling a bit more than you?
No, they've all seemed to handle it quite well. Mm.
Oh, good. So they must take after their old man, hey? So fairly practical. And did you feel connected to your family and friends throughout lockdown? How did you maintain those connections when they weren't allowed to come and visit you? And how long was that, by the way, that they weren't allowed to come here?
It was several weeks.
Mm.
And the phone was the best means of communication.
Okay, so you did use the telephone a lot.
Mm.
Did you ever get onto a Zoom or any video conferencing? Did they set that up?
No.
No, you haven't done that?
No.
Oh, yeah, no, the telephone's good, isn't it?
Mm.
Okay, so you had regular contact with your family and
yeah.
people through that.
Mm.
Yeah, wonderful. And what are your observations, thoughts or opinions on this, the impact of COVID-19, not just here in Wantirna and for your sort of family, but let's go broader. Have you got any concerns about this for not just Victoria but Australia and the world?
Particularly of those parts of the world where the facilities for treatment, for diagnosis and treatment, are not as good as other parts. Mm. And I'm always concerned about the fact that the United States have had a huge number of deaths, and that the retiring, I hope, president seemed to have no concern about that at all.
Interesting, wasn't it? It was a really interesting thing to watch. So many countries have handled it so differently, haven't they? Mm. And I think that the numbers are reflected for various reasons, aren't they?
Yes.
We've got a really low population in Australia, and lots of wide open spaces and not too much, I guess, high density living. So we're in a very unique position comparatively to Europe and to a lot of places in America. But yeah, so you had concerns about the way it was managed in places like America and for the people that live there.
Mm. Now, we have some missionary interests in Bangladesh, and we are naturally enough very interested in reports of the situation there.
Mm.
But it depends which country you think of.
Very much so.
And there are so many other factors that are operating at the same time.
Definitely.
Well,
everything's so unique, isn't it? And there are a lot of developing countries that are not set up at all for this sort of thing. They're overcrowded.
Yes.
There's a lot of economic disparity in places, isn't there? So there's a lot to look at with this pandemic, isn't there?
Yes. Even locally, of course, we have a great many people whose command of English is very, very meagre. And so it's difficult to get the message across to them and to get their responses and interpret them.
That's true. That's really true. It's a good point. When we have got quite a lot of people with English as a second language in in Melbourne and the outer suburbs, and in fact in all of Victoria. We've got a very multicultural state, don't we? Which is a blessing as well. But it is difficult for people when they haven't got English as their first language to sort of know what information that, you know, to utilise information perhaps, and culturally very different. So, it poses some interesting little problems, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, we're almost to the end of our interview, Robert. A couple of last questions for you. How do you think you'd feel if you were told that we're about to go into another lockdown, for example, next year, in that sort of cold flu season that happens? How does that make you feel instantly?
I'd certainly regret it, and I'd want to know what bungle had caused it. But I would simply have to accept it as a law-abiding citizen.
So you're thinking, do you feel like it's likely? What's a man of your experience feeling about that? Do you feel like it's likely that we will go into another lockdown after we've just been in one this year? Just, you know, because just in case, you know, everyone's sort of hopes seem to be riding on a vaccine, which, you know, the trials at the moment being done and nothing's appropriate as yet. So what do you feel about, you know, even just that reliance on the vaccine, and also, you know, what's your feelings about if it's wise for us to go into another lockdown in terms of prevention? What are your opinions on that?
We don't know whether the vaccines will be prophylactic for a long period of time, and so that's one of the unknowns. And I think we have to be prepared for anything.
I think that's true. Yes. I think we're in a bit of an unknown time at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you? Yeah. I guess that's a nice sort of discussion to finish on in a way. Although I will ask my final question to you that I ask everybody at the end of the interview in a minute. But do you feel that as a person that's 96, you know, that you've lived a long time now and you've gone through a lot of historical events and you've seen a lot in your time, do you feel like we're in unprecedented times, as the you know, the Premier repeated every week at his press conferences, and it seems that we are in a time that no one's sort of seen before in a way. Of course that's going to be true every day, it's new, but in the way that we are in our Australian culture too, in our country, do you feel that as a person that's lived a long time that we're actually in really unprecedented and unknown sort of territory?
I think every period is unprecedented.
Yeah.
There are certain roots in the past in every case, but I think that we have no need to complain of the fact that there are differences.
Excellent, yeah. Yeah, we're pretty lucky.
Unless we're wedded in our thoughts to the old days, and you know, people sometimes don't bother to keep up to date in their thinking and their understanding of the situation, and they say, "Oh, in my day, such and such a thing happened or didn't happen."
Yeah, you hear that a lot, actually, don't you? You don't think that sort of serves anything?
It doesn't serve anything at all, and it's far better to be able to keep up to date and to be able to converse about current things.
Adapt.
Yeah.
It's the key to long life. It seems like it's worked for you, Robert. Here you are, and you're, you know, sharp as a tack, and you've been adapting your whole life and keeping up to date with things. And,
oh yes,
yeah.
I just think of ageing, that it's one day after another, and we make the best of it.
Absolutely, we're ageing from the moment we're born, aren't we?
Oh yes.
Well, my final question to you today, Robert, is that I ask everybody is: was there a particular I guess, a particular image or a particular thought that kept reoccurring to you this year, or even a type of music or a book that you were drawn to, or something that you just felt that really meant something to you through this time? Was there anything that you can remember that kept sort of reoccurring, or you were feeling particularly inclined towards during this strange year that was 2020 and during the social isolation?
Well, it's been a pretty interesting year. With nothing of very, very great moment. I've done some book reviews and contributed to a couple of books written by a friend about wartime and so forth.
Oh, lovely.
I think I've been well enough occupied mentally that I haven't had time to feel sorry about things.
It sounds like it. It sounds like you were fairly level through the whole thing. Yeah, we could all learn a lot from you, I think. Yeah.
I'm just very, very thankful that things are as they are. I mentioned at the beginning of this manuscript about how grateful I am to have been born into a so-called working class family.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
With Christian parents, and this is the origin of my philosophy that every person is of equal value. And this has enabled me to mix with people of all kinds of social and economic and political and so forth views.
Yes.
It's been a great help.
So yeah, that working class background that you emerged from with Christian values has really helped you in your life to basically treat everybody as equal and to meet the world like that.
Yes, and that hasn't in any sort of way inhibited my association with people of so-called upper class.
Yeah, that's I'm sure you're meeting everybody in
the class in between.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, that draws our interview to a close, Robert, unless you've got something else that you would like to share with us, or any final thoughts about the year that you've had, or anything that you felt compelled to say. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today. And
Oh no, I just live a happy existence and don't try to make too many other people unhappy.
Great. I think, if we could all just hold on to that as our primary way of going about life, I think things would be a lot better.
Yeah.
Well, you're doing so well, and thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear the opinions, thoughts and story of someone that's lived 96 years. So I really appreciate it. And all the very best for 2021. May you stay in good health.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Lockdown Stories from Inside. I hope you've enjoyed this interview and it's provided you with plenty of food for thought and the opportunity to expand your understanding of the breadth of human experience. Thank you for lending your ears as we walked a mile in someone else's shoes. See you next time.